You're on a road trip, cruising through wide-open highways, and suddenly you realize something. You haven't thought about charging your car in days. Not because you forgot, but because you don't need to. Your electric vehicle just keeps going, and going, and going. Sounds like science fiction, right? Well, one inventor claims he's turned that fantasy into reality, and if he's right, everything we know about transportation is about to flip upside down. So here's the deal. There's this guy, an inventor who says he's cracked the code on something scientists have been chasing for over a century, a machine that generates its own power indefinitely. No charging cables, no battery anxiety, no stopping every few hundred miles to plug in and wait. Just pure, continuous energy that never runs out. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds absolutely impossible. And you're not alone. The entire scientific community is saying the same thing. But here's where it gets interesting. What if they're wrong? Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening right now with electric vehicles. They're incredible machines, no doubt about it. Silent, powerful, environmentally friendly compared to gas guzzlers. But they've got one massive Achilles heel, the battery. Every single EV rolling down the street today is basically a prisoner to that battery pack sitting underneath the floor. You drive for a few hours, maybe 200, 300 miles if you're lucky, and then boom, you're hunting for a charging station. And when you find one, you're not talking about a 5-minute gas station stop. You're looking at anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours, depending on your setup. And it gets worse. Those batteries don't last forever. They degrade over time, losing capacity with every charge cycle. After a few years, your car that used to go 300 miles on a full charge might only manage 250, then 200. Your vehicle is literally losing its capability just by existing. Plus, the resale value tanks because nobody wants to buy an EV with a worn-out battery that costs thousands upon thousands to replace. It's like buying a phone that you know will be half as useful in 3 years, except this phone costs $50,000. But now imagine a completely different reality. Imagine if your car could generate electricity faster than it uses it. Not store it. Generate it, on demand, while you're driving. That's the claim we're diving into today. A self-sustaining power system that supposedly breaks free from every limitation we've accepted as unchangeable facts about electric vehicles. No infrastructure needed, no degradation over time, theoretically unlimited range. You could drive from New York to Los Angeles, turn around, drive back, and never once think about plugging in. This sounds insane because it kind of is. For decades, actually for centuries, inventors have been chasing this exact dream. They call it perpetual motion or over-unity energy. The idea that you can create a machine that outputs more power than it takes in. And every single time, without fail, physics has shut that dream down hard. The laws of thermodynamics are crystal clear. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Every machine loses some energy to heat, to friction, to resistance. Nothing is 100% efficient, let alone more than 100%. It's considered one of the most fundamental rules of our universe. Break that rule, and you're basically claiming you've rewritten reality itself. So when someone comes along saying they've done exactly that, you can imagine the response. Scientists roll their eyes. Engineers shake their heads. The mainstream media either ignores it completely or treats it like a joke. And honestly, that's usually the right response, because 99.9% of the time, these claims fall apart under scrutiny. The inventor made a measurement error. The machine was secretly plugged into the wall. The demonstration was rigged. It happens over and over again throughout history. But here's the thing that keeps this conversation alive. Every once in a while, something that seemed completely impossible becomes everyday reality. Think about it. Before the Wright brothers, human flight was considered fantasy. Respected scientists wrote papers proving mathematically that heavier-than-air flight was impossible. Then 2 bicycle mechanics from Ohio went and did it anyway. When radio waves were first discovered, people thought the idea of sending voices through thin air was witchcraft. Electricity itself was once considered a party trick with no practical value. And quantum mechanics, the foundation of all modern electronics, was initially dismissed as absolute nonsense by some of the greatest minds of the early 20th century. So maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't completely write off every claim that challenges our current understanding. Maybe the question isn't whether this technology works exactly as advertised right this second, but whether it points us toward something we haven't figured out yet. Something that could genuinely transform how we think about energy itself. Let's get practical for a second. Say this self-powered technology is real. How would you even put it into a car that already exists? Let's break down what would need to happen. Every electric vehicle on the road has a pretty straightforward setup. You've got a battery pack, usually mounted low in the chassis for stability. You've got electric motors, either one or several depending on the model. You've got an inverter that converts the battery's direct current into the alternating current the motors need. And you've got a sophisticated computer system managing everything, making sure power flows efficiently and safely. Now, if you wanted to retrofit a self-generating power unit into that system, you'd need to integrate it seamlessly with all those existing components. The generator would need to output the right voltage and current that the motors expect. It would need to work with the regenerative braking system that captures energy when you slow down. It would need to communicate with the car's computer so the vehicle knows what's happening with its power supply. This isn't like swapping out your stereo. This is fundamental surgery on the vehicle's entire electrical nervous system, and then there's the physical reality of it. Where does this generator actually go? Cars are designed with very specific weight distributions. Engineers spend years perfecting the balance so the vehicle handles predictably and safely. You can't just bolt a 100-pound generator somewhere random and call it a day. It would change how the car accelerates, how it corners, how it brakes. You'd need to redesign the whole chassis to accommodate it properly. Plus, you've got to think about space. Modern EVs are already cramped with components. Battery packs take up the entire floor. Motors and inverters fill the spaces between wheels. There's not exactly a convenient empty spot waiting for a revolutionary new power source. Heat is another massive issue. Current electric vehicles already generate significant heat that needs to be managed carefully. Batteries get hot during charging and discharging. Motors get hot during hard acceleration. Power electronics get hot just doing their job. That's why EVs have complex liquid cooling systems with pumps, radiators, and sensors constantly monitoring temperatures. Now add a generator that's supposedly producing energy continuously. How much heat does that create? Where does that heat go? You might need an entirely new cooling system just for this one component, which adds weight, which requires more power, which creates more heat. See how complicated this gets? Then we hit the regulatory nightmare. Every single component in a modern vehicle has to pass incredibly strict safety standards. Crash tests, electrical safety tests, emissions tests, durability tests, temperature tests. The list goes on forever. These regulations exist for good reasons. Cars are incredibly dangerous machines when something goes wrong. Before any automaker could legally sell a vehicle with this kind of unproven technology, they'd need to spend years and tens of millions of dollars proving it's safe. And that's assuming the technology even works as claimed, which brings us back to the fundamental problem. As of right now, there's no peer-reviewed scientific validation of this self-powered system. Let me be completely clear about what that means. Science doesn't progress through YouTube videos or private demonstrations in someone's garage. It progresses through rigorous testing, measurement, and replication by independent researchers. You publish your methodology. Other scientists build the same device following your instructions. They measure the results with calibrated instruments. They try to find ways your experiment might be wrong. They publish their findings. Other teams replicate it again. And after multiple independent confirmations, the scientific community starts to accept that something new has been discovered. That process hasn't happened here, not even close. But let's engage with the thought experiment anyway. Let's imagine the technology gets validated tomorrow. Let's say a major university gets their hands on one of these generators, tests it extensively, and confirms it works exactly as advertised. The readings are solid. The energy output genuinely exceeds the input. It's reproducible and reliable. What happens next? The world changes overnight. I'm not exaggerating. If self-sustaining energy generation becomes real and practical, we're talking about a paradigm shift that makes the smartphone revolution look minor. Think about the implications. The entire oil and gas industry, worth trillions of dollars globally, starts its death spiral immediately. Why would anyone buy gasoline or diesel when vehicles can power themselves infinitely? Charging networks become obsolete. All those billions being invested in fast chargers and charging infrastructure? Wasted. Battery manufacturers would see their markets collapse because you wouldn't need massive battery packs anymore. Maybe a small backup battery for redundancy, but nothing like the current systems. Utility companies would face an existential crisis. If vehicles can generate their own power, why stop there? Why not power your home with the same technology? Your entire house running indefinitely on a generator the size of a suitcase. No electric bill. Ever. The entire concept of the power grid, this massive infrastructure of power plants and transmission lines that's existed for over a century, becomes unnecessary. Energy independence wouldn't be some future goal. It would be immediate reality, and here's where it gets really wild. Cars wouldn't just be transportation anymore. They'd be mobile power plants. Imagine driving your self-powered vehicle to a disaster zone where the electrical grid has been destroyed. You park your car, plug it into a hospital or emergency shelter, and suddenly you're providing unlimited electricity to keep life-saving equipment running. Think about remote areas where power lines have never reached. One vehicle could electrify an entire village indefinitely. No fuel deliveries needed. No infrastructure required. Just park the car and let it generate. For developing nations, this would be absolutely transformative. Many countries never built extensive electrical grids because the infrastructure costs were too high. With technology like this, they could leapfrog that entire stage of development. Skip straight to decentralized power generation, where every vehicle, every building, every community has its own independent energy source. No more dependence on foreign oil, no more massive central power plants, just distributed energy everywhere it's needed. The environmental implications alone would reshape civilization. Transportation accounts for a huge chunk of global carbon emissions. Power generation accounts for even more. If both of those sectors could transition to truly clean, self-sustaining energy, we're talking about cutting global emissions by an absolutely massive percentage. Climate change mitigation suddenly becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Now let's pump the brakes for a second because we've drifted pretty far into speculation territory. All of those incredible implications depend entirely on the technology actually working, and that remains unproven. The physics community isn't skeptical because they're close-minded or protecting their reputations. They're skeptical because every law of thermodynamics, confirmed through literally millions of experiments over 2 centuries, says this shouldn't be possible. Energy conservation isn't just a good idea, it's a fundamental property of the universe as we understand it. Every machine we've ever built, from the simplest lever to the most sophisticated spacecraft, loses energy to friction, heat, and resistance. Efficiency has limits. You can approach 100% in certain systems under ideal conditions, but you can never exceed it. That's not a law humans invented. It's a pattern we observed in nature and described mathematically. So when someone claims to have broken that law, the burden of proof is enormous. And it should be, because if the claim is wrong, which historically it almost always is, you don't want society wasting resources chasing impossible dreams. But if the claim is right, if someone genuinely has discovered a loophole or a new phenomenon that changes our understanding, then the burden of proof is absolutely worth meeting because the payoff is incalculable. That's why transparency matters so much. Science works in the open. You share your designs. You share your data. You invite criticism and scrutiny because that's how we separate truth from delusion. Secret demonstrations help no one. Private showings for select audiences prove nothing. If this technology is real, it needs to survive contact with the harsh reality of independent testing. It needs to work when built by other teams using the same specifications. It needs to perform consistently under measurement by calibrated instruments operated by skeptical scientists. Until that happens, we're left in this weird limbo. There are demonstrations on video. There are testimonials from witnesses. There's clearly something being shown. But without rigorous scientific validation, we can't separate genuine breakthrough from experimental error, measurement mistake, or even deliberate deception. And that's frustrating because if it is real, every day spent in this limbo is a day we're not revolutionizing energy. But if it's not real, every day spent pursuing it is a day not spent on solutions that actually work. Here's what I think is valuable, regardless of whether this specific technology pans out. The conversation itself pushes us forward. Every time someone challenges the boundaries of what's possible, it forces engineers and scientists to think creatively. Maybe the exact approach being demonstrated doesn't work, but maybe it inspires someone to try something adjacent. Maybe it highlights a gap in our understanding that leads to different discoveries. Maybe it reminds us that progress requires people willing to look foolish, chasing seemingly impossible ideas. Because let's be honest, every major breakthrough looked ridiculous before it worked. The Wright brothers were considered delusional. Tesla's ideas about alternating current were mocked by Edison and the establishment. The scientists who proposed the future of transportation might not be bigger batteries or faster chargers. It might be something so different from our current assumptions that we can barely imagine it yet. And the only way we discover that future is by staying curious, staying open, and staying willing to investigate ideas that sound too good to be true. Because sometimes, just sometimes, they're not. If you found this deep dive fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're going to keep exploring the bleeding edge of technology where reality and possibility collide. Share this with someone who loves talking about the future, because these conversations matter. They shape what we build next. And who knows? Maybe one of you watching right now will be the person who finally cracks the code on unlimited clean energy. Stranger things have happened. Until next time, keep questioning, keep dreaming, and keep chasing the impossible. That's where all the interesting stuff happens.